15 weeks. We started with Parshas Lech Lecha, and we've gone until now. And the tricky part now is that the narrative is over. When it comes to the Parshas, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, we went through Yisro one after the next, week after week, and now we get down to the nitty-gritty. So there are a lot of details, there are a lot of halachos in this week's Parsha that are very hard to make relevant, because I don't know anyone here is a cattle farmer. Does anyone here own slaves? Right? I'm saying, it's interesting. I saw this just yesterday. The Parsha opens, Ve'ele HaMishpatim Asher Tasim Lifnehem. These are the laws, HaMishpatim, Asher Tasim Lifnehem, that you shall place before the people, before them. So what does it mean you should place these laws before them? That's a strange phrase. So the Sforno suggests that what that means is that there are lots of commandments in the Torah that every person has to do. It comes Sukkot time, you have to go as far as you have to go to find the lulav. Comes time for Pesach Seder, you got to go out and buy matzah. What if you don't own matzah? You got to go find it. There are halachos, there are laws in this week's parsha about cows. If you don't own a cow, do you have to go buy one? No. If you own a cow and it gores somebody else's sheep, then you have the following consequences. Those are also mitzvos, but those mitzvos are dependent on circumstances. So this week's parsha has a lot of those things that come up that are very difficult to make relevant, at least in our setting. However, one thing that's always relevant is when two men get into a brawl. And that's what we're going to start with in source 1. V'chi yirivun anashim, this is source 1, pasuk yudches, in the Perek Chaf Aleph. If men quarrel, and one strikes his fellow with a stone or a fist, v'lo yamos v'nafal mishkav, he doesn't die, but he falls into bed, meaning from the injuries. Im yakum, if he gets up and goes about outside under his own power, v'nika hamakeh, so then the one who struck him is absolved because he recovered. However, so he's not going to be responsible for killing the person because he didn't die. That's the point. However, rak shivto yitin v'rapo yirape, but he does have to pay for the actions that he did, for the violence. What does he have to pay? For the lost time, because the person was unemployed at the time that he was injured, and he shall provide for the healing. So that's the title of the shir, V'rapo Yirape. He shall surely heal. This double terminology that we have often in the Chumash. So let's start with a story, I guess, and put this pasuk into context. The Midrash tells a story, which is not on the sheet, of a person who was ill, and he was looking to figure out a solution. So he bumps into Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael on the street. So he says to them, Rabbeinu, he says, I'm not feeling well. I have this and this is wrong with me. What should I do? So Rabbi Akiva looks at Rabbi Yishmael, and what do they say? Take Advil, or whatever was necessary. They tell him what the remedy is, or what they were familiar with. So the guy looks at them and he says, you want me to take medicine? So they said, yeah, we do. And he said, well, isn't God the source of all illness? This he says back to the rabbis. So the rabbis say, yeah, and you need to get better, so you should take the medicine. So he says, well, if God wants me to be sick, shouldn't I be addressing God? That's why I came to you. He didn't go to a doctor, he went to the rabbi. So Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yishmael, one of them replies to the man, what do you do for a living? So he says, I'm a farmer. So he says, what do you do? So he says, well, I plant, and I this and I that, and I harvest. So he says, why are you touching the ground? He says, what do you mean? If I don't plant seeds, I'm not going to be able to grow anything. So he says, if God didn't put the seeds there, who gives you the right to plant the seeds? And the point he was making was that you have to take care of yourself. But it's interesting that that is one conversation in the Midrash, and then we're going to show a bunch of other sources also that point out that practicing medicine, and here again with the title, practicing medicine is to a certain extent playing God. It's interfering with the choices that God has made. And the question we have to ask is that acceptable? And where are you going to draw the line? This isn't just a question for the practice of medicine. This is a question in general. If you believe that you're supposed to study Torah and go to shul and do all these things, but you can't because you have to go to work, so what are you saying? God's not going to provide for me. I have to go make the money myself.
Actually, we just said that just as we walked in. We said we have to make the best effort, and God does the rest. Right?
Right. So the term that they use, they talk about hishtadlus. And that term means to be mishtadel, means to put in your effort. And the question really is where you draw the line. How much effort we have to put in and how much we expect from God in return.
But in the same token, medicine, if it comes life and death, life comes first. So you take the medicine.
So it's interesting. I was talking to one of the guys in our kollel this morning, and he said, well, aren't you supposed to take care, aren't you supposed to protect your body? Right? Aren't you supposed to save someone? All these things. So we have to figure out exactly the situation. Let's take a look at source number 2, and we're going to build the question a little bit more. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Omer. In the school of Rabbi Yishmael, they would say, V'rapo yirapeh. Based on our verse, you shall provide for healing. Mikan shenitain rishus l'rofe l'rapos. From here we know that a doctor is given permission to heal. Now the counter pressure that this piece in the Talmud is dealing with is exactly what we're talking about. Are you interfering with God's plan by healing someone who's in need of refuah? So the Gemara says, you see from our source that it's okay. Why are you paying for someone's medical bills? Obviously, if you're paying for his medical bills, it means he's going to see a doctor. So the Torah apparently thinks that it's acceptable. It's interesting. There's no reference to doctors really in the Torah. There's very little. And this is the one time when the Torah says, pay for medical bills, assuming that there's going to be doctors to practice medicine. And from there you get a sense that this is the first sense we get in the Torah that it's acceptable.
Life comes first.
I saw this morning also when Yaakov when Yitzchak and Rivka, when Isaac and Rebecca are expecting their children, and she's experiencing these labor pains. So what does she do? Remember the story? So Isaac and Rebecca, it says, according to the Midrash, when she passes by the synagogue, she feels kicking, and when she passes by the church or the idol, whatever place where they worship idols, she hears kicking again, and she's not sure what to deal with this child. So she goes according to the Midrash, to the house of Shem Be'ever. She goes Lidrosh Elokim to search out God. Why doesn't she go to a doctor? So that's one of the first sources where this conversation gets started. But there isn't any mention of doctors.
Rabbi once said something that stuck in my head relating to this. He once said that we should view doctors as agents of Hashem.
Ah, right. Okay, so we're going to get there. Good. So look at Rashi's comment. So the Gemara here, source number 2, that piece in the Talmud, is addressing the question, how do you know it's acceptable to practice medicine? And they say we learn it from the verse in this week's Parsha. Look at Rashi. Rashi explains what we spoke out. A doctor is given permission to heal, and we don't say God makes him ill, God heals him. Because you could have had that possibility. Now, we mentioned V'rapo yirapeh, you should surely heal, is these two terms back to back. We call a double lashon. Tosfos, in his comment there at the end of source 2, is bothered by why the Torah here chooses to use that double lashon. Why V'rapo and yirapeh? And Tosfos says the doctor is given permission to heal. You may ask, from Rapo alone, we learn this. We already know the Torah says you pay for the doctor. Why does it have to say you shall surely heal him twice in a row? So Tosfos says we can suggest that you may have thought only a human-induced injury, but an illness that comes from heaven that one attempts to heal appears like disobeying the king's decree. From here we see it's acceptable. So whenever you approach a piece in the Talmud, you always have to figure out what was the question that was bothering the rabbis when they wrote this, and how did they answer it. So here the Gemara gives us one statement. From our parsha you see you can heal. Tosfos says, why does it say it twice over? V'rapo yirapeh. So what it's referring to is one for healing that was for injuries that were caused by other human beings, and one for injuries that were caused by God. So first of all, I would like to ask you, are some injuries caused by people and not by God?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Example?
Bar fight.
God doesn't want you to be in the bar in that situation. Where is He's not looking out for you?
Street fight, same thing.
God's there, right? We believe God is there. So philosophically, is there a difference between pneumonia and a bar fight?
Yeah.
If God doesn't want you to get hit, He'll make sure that the guy that gets mad at you is drunk and swings and misses. You don't have to get hit. If God doesn't want you to get hit, you won't get hit.
Interesting. Although pneumonia is more of a sickness, whereas a bar fight, you get hit, it's more of a pain.
So, interesting. Remember, until this point in the Torah, we're only less than 2/5 of the way through. We have no reference to medicine. And the Torah says when two guys get into a bar fight, the doctors can come in and stitch you up. So what Tosfos is saying, what the logic is in this question, is maybe you would have told me that in situations like source number 1, it's perfectly acceptable to seek medical treatment. A broken bone from a bar fight or something else, that's acceptable. But when you go into the doctor's office and they tell you that you've got something serious out of the blue, again we can debate that also, maybe the Torah never gave us permission to deal with that. Maybe, this is a harsh question, but maybe cancer is from God. What right do you have to interfere? You get into a bar fight and you're drunk, you make a mistake, you can see a doctor. He'll stitch you up. But cancer is a message from heaven. Maybe, says Tosfos, virapo yirape, once for the bar fight and once for the cancer.
Sorry, what does that actually mean?
So Resh Pei Aleph, that 3-letter root word means to heal.
Okay.
And you have a lot of phrases in the Torah where you have 2 back-to-backs. It's the exact same word. It's just repeated twice in a row. Usually the way it's translated, which is not literal, is you shall surely blank. You shouldn't just heal, you should surely heal, which is a difficult thing to really put into English, but it's usually there for emphasis. So Tosfos here is saying something which is a little bit unique in that each time, each word refers to a different thing. Virapo, you can heal in our situation where there was physical injury as a result of the fight, and Yirape, you can also heal under other circumstances. What's the point of Tosfos? The point is not that cancer is not from God, but that everything is from God. That's what I think. It's all more or less divinely decreed, or we wouldn't be in that situation. And if that's the case, we always have the right to protect our bodies. We always have the right to seek treatment. That's where this discussion gets started.
Sorry,
Yeah, please.
I missed that point. It's all the source of everything is from Hashem, okay? So if you do get sick, we recognize, acknowledge it's from Hashem. And then you said, but we have the right to seek medical help, right?
Right.
So how did you make that connection?
Because the question that Tosfos was addressing was, the Torah clearly says you can seek medical advice or medical treatment. The question is when. So you might have limited it to a specific scenario, right?
Yeah.
So the Torah says it twice over to extend it. Now Tosfos is assuming once it's said twice, that means it's no holds barred. It's perfectly fine to seek treatment under any circumstances. So how do you take our philosophical question? What about interfering with God? Can you distinguish between different kinds of diseases and injuries and needs of medicine? No, no distinctions. Where do you know that from? Our Parsha.
Does the Torah not state that life comes first?
So the Torah does state that life comes first, but the question is, it's a v'nishmartem me'od lenafsho seichem. You should watch carefully over your bodies. So, but maybe that's, I should do my part. But when things happen, you shouldn't put yourself in a risky situation. That's, I think that, because this question came up this morning, you shouldn't jump out of airplanes without a parachute, because, or even maybe with, because it's too risky. You don't have the right to put, Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say this, I think, that man doesn't own his own body. In the context of tattoos and things, whatever, different contexts where he mentioned this, that your body is not yours. Your body is lent from God. You're supposed to return it the way you got it, to the best of your ability. You don't have the right to put yourself in that situation. But when for whatever reason something is divinely decreed, and we'll never know why God wants us to be in the situation that we are. But that's what happened. That's the disease you contracted. There's nothing we can do about it. So should you interfere with God's plan or not? You shouldn't. Should you make a conscious decision to drive with your eyes closed? Absolutely not. Why not? Because you're supposed to protect your body. But when it comes from God and there's nothing to do, maybe, you shouldn't seek that. You shouldn't go to the doctor. You shouldn't attempt to heal what God has injured.
But not according to Tosfos.
Right. So that whole approach is rejected. To be clear, going to the doctor is perfectly okay. we'll get back to this phrase in the Gemara. We're going to focus on it. That's really the only source. There is a second source that comes up in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that the Gemara here, which is not on the page, and we have a mitzvah in the Torah to return a lost object. And there is an opinion in the Gemara which states that just like you have the responsibility to return someone's lost object, you have a responsibility to return their body to them. What does that mean? It means if a person is drowning in the river, you have a responsibility to jump in and pull them out. And what some have taken from this, interesting with the Rambam, Maimonides is one of the people that did, he says, how do you know that there's a mitzvah to be a doctor? How do you know there's a mitzvah to heal people? And he doesn't quote our source. He doesn't quote our parsha. He quotes the returning a lost object, which is really beyond the scope of this discussion, but it's definitely something to look into. But these are the only two sources for the right and the responsibility to heal. Interesting. So if it's true that there are two sources, why do you need two? I saw one suggestion, very interesting, from somebody that we talked about recently in the class, that the first one is telling you you have the right to heal, right? Rishus, it says you have permission to heal. And the second one, it says it a second time that you should heal people. One is to tell you that it's a mitzvah, and the other one is to tell you that you have the right to charge. If it's a mitzvah, maybe you don't have the right to charge people for it. I have a responsibility as a good Jew.
You charge money-wise.
Yeah, charge, yeah. So one source to tell you that A, it's philosophically understandable and within our rights and responsibilities to heal, and the second, if I go through medical school, I have the right to charge patient by patient. Which is, again, maybe more of a discussion about mitzvos in general, charging for mitzvos, benefiting from mitzvos, but that's something to think about. In source 3 and source 4, we'll discuss two similar opinions, slightly different, that are very difficult to appreciate because of what we're so used to, and based on that Tosos, that it's perfectly acceptable to seek medical treatment. So take a look at source 3, and we can fight it out, see what exactly the Ibn Ezra is talking about. Virapo Yirape is a sign that doctors are given permission to heal injuries that are externally visible. But any injury which is internal is in the hands of God to heal. And it states, this is a pasuk from a verse from Job, he inflicts and bandages, referring to God. God is the one who inflicts damage, and God is the one who bandages it up. Because of Ba'asa, and regarding the king of the Jewish people, whose name was Asa, it says, Gam b'chol yo lo darash es Hashem. Also, when he was ill, he did not seek God. Ki im berofim. Rather, he went to doctors. And we'll see exactly, but meaning he made the mistake of going to the doctor. The question is, did he make the mistake by ignoring God also? Maybe balance the two. And now one piece of dikta, one piece of grammar that maybe we won't focus on too much. Hilo Amar, the Torah, the verse is explicit because it doesn't say Virapo Yirape mi binyan hakal. Rak Virapo Yirape shehu mi binyan kaved. I think the translation here is not 100% correct. In Hebrew, you have a number of letters that sometimes have dots in the middle and sometimes don't. Those are called the binyan kal and the binyan kaved. One is lighter, one is heavier. The one that has the dot in it is usually referred to as a heavier conjugation. And so pei, the letter pei, is like that. Sometimes it sounds like an F, and sometimes it sounds like a P, or a P and a PH, I guess you would say, depending on whether there's a dot in it or not. As you see in the title, Virapo Yirape, both P's had dots in them. So one interesting example to think about here is the Shoresh Shin Bet Resh, means to break. And when Moshe Rabbeinu has the Ten Commandments, the Luchos, in his hands, and he comes down the mountain, it doesn't say Vayeshaber Osam, he broke them, he dropped them and they broke. It says Vayeshaber with a dot in it, meaning not that he broke them, but he smashed them when he was so upset with the people. It always implies a more intense, more powerful conjugation. So what the Ibn Ezra is referring to here is Virapo Yirape is clearly talking about man healing another man, because it's more difficult for human beings to heal each other than it is for God to remove illness. So Virapo Yirape is actually a reference to specifically to human beings and not to God. But the point that he's making here, and we have to try and understand this to the best of our ability, is that the Ibn Ezra says that our pasuk, like Tosfos' original assumption, is only allowing us to heal external wounds, things that are visible. After all, we're talking about a fight between two people. We're talking about black and blue marks, we're talking about broken bones, things like that, things that you can see. But internal kidney disease, liver disease, that's not our business, that's not our place. That was his opinion.
That can be caused in a fight too.
Right.
Very quickly and very easily.
Right, which it makes this very difficult to understand. So how can you get there?
If you get into a fight, okay, and somebody decides to take your liver and your kidneys, okay, now that's internal damage.
Right.
Okay, now how does that work out? Because it's not a cut.
Right.
It's not a break.
Exactly. This is it's hard to make sense of this. What's the divide? We're going to have to remember, this is written a few hundred years ago, that there's going to be some historical discrepancy between things that the rabbis of 500 years ago thought about medicine and we did, in terms of the way they approached it. They maybe had no idea that we would have ultrasounds and x-rays and bone scans and things like that. It's interesting because, and we'll get back to this also, one possible explanation of this Ibn Ezra is, again, that it's centered on our conversation from the beginning, this philosophical question of do we have the right to heal? And one explanation given was that he assumed that anything that's external, anything that's visible, a doctor has a good chance at. If the doctor sees the black and blue mark, if he sees where he needs to stitch you up, he can stitch you up. If it's kidney or liver, how's a doctor in the 13th, 14th, 15th century going to figure this out? He can guess, but he really has no idea what to do. I don't know enough about medicine, especially historically, to make that assessment, but that's what they say. And if it's true, it goes back to the philosophical question. What are you going to do in that situation? You don't know how to heal the person. It's something that's uncurable. Maybe that's the point here. Are you going to keep going? Are you going to be so determined? Or is it time to put down your syringe and pick up your sitter and pray? And maybe that's one approach to what he was saying. That when it's external, when it's visible, when we can get at it, we should heal it. When it's not, don't be focused on guessing. Once you're at that stage, you may as well be just turning to God, which I think is really interesting. Hold number 3 in your head. Number 4, I don't think we're going to do inside because it takes a long time, but you're welcome to read it. The Ramban, Nachmanides, in his commentary to the Parsha, in Sefer Vayikra, he basically says that one should not get the impression that medicine is perfectly fine philosophically. After all, look at the verses that the Ibn Ezra quoted. God is involved. God is the one who causes illness. God is the one who heals. So why do we have doctors? So Ramban's approach is that there are two realities in this world. There's the reality of the tzaddik, and there's the reality of the average person. The righteous person, the spiritual man who's connected to God through prophecy which doesn't exist in our time, that person, if we believe that kidney disease comes from heaven, so what should you have done, like the Midrash that we opened with? You should go to the Navi and you should say, listen, I'm sick. I don't really know what God's trying to say. Can you help me out? And that's what they would do. And the Navi would say, this is something you need to be working on. This is what God, the message that God is trying to send. And the solution to your disease was not, a transplant. The solution to your disease was more learning Torah, being a better parent, being a better child, whatever it was. We counted on spiritual guidance to make the decision of where we had a flaw in character. And wherever that was, that's where we would heal ourselves. But the Ramban's going to say, we, people in this room, the people of 700 years ago already, don't live under those kind of conditions. So maybe let's take a look a little bit inside in English. The rule is that when Israel is complete and great, their issues do not involve nature at all, not in their bodies, not in their land, not as a group or individual. God blesses their bread and their water, removes sickness from within them, till there's no need for doctors or protective medicine. As it states, Ani Hashem Rofecha, I am God your healer. Such was the behavior of the righteous in the times of the prophets. If their sin caused illness, they would not seek doctors, rather the prophet, like Chizkiyahu in his illness. The verse states, referring to Asa, or maybe we should explain who he was a little bit, in his illness he didn't seek God. And if there was a custom of medical practice, why did it fault him for mentioning the doctors? If everyone else was going to seek treatment, why couldn't he? The sin would only be for not seeking God. Rather, it's like one who states, I shall not eat matzah on Passover, rather just chametz. So what does that mean? His fault was twofold. One, that he was doing something wrong, and two, that he was doing an additional thing. I'm not going to eat matzah on Pesach. I'm only going to eat chametz. So you should be eating matzah, and you shouldn't be eating chametz. So he says he didn't seek God. He went to the doctors. So the Ramban says both of those are his mistakes. Who is Asa? So the Navi tells us, this comes up in the books of Kings a few generations after King David. It comes up again in Divrei Hayamim. The land of Israel was split north and south between what we called Israel and Judah, Yisrael and Yehuda. Yisrael was in the north, Yehuda was in the south at that point in history. And there was a lot of fighting between them, and they basically drew a line in the sand, and there was not so much connection between the two. And there was an alliance between the north of Israel, Yisrael, and what is now Syria at that time. And when the south, which was led by the king Asa, who had a tremendous spiritual impact on the community, he was a very religious person, he abolished a lot of idolatry that was in the land. He was very successful. The Navi describes him as a very righteous person, like Dovid, his father, his grandfather, and King David. And they were being threatened by the north, which was a sad state in Jewish history, but that was the reality. And he takes, rather than just protecting his people, he takes a lot of his money, his gold and his silver, and he sends it on a mission to the king of Syria, and he bribes the guy to break his treaty with the north of Israel. And I guess there were enough funds there that the king agreed and sabotaged the plans of the north, and that saved the south. That saved the area of Yehuda while Asa was the king. And while you think that he's been successful spiritually, and now he's being successful militarily, a prophet knocks on the door of the king, who was apparently already not so successful, I think, with his PR campaign, according to some of the commentaries. And the prophet knocks on the door, and he says to the king, you realize you made a terrible mistake. If you're doing the right thing, if you're looking out for the best of the Jewish people, or your portion of the Jewish people, you don't need anyone else's help. All you need is God. And you're promoting spirituality. You're encouraging the people to get rid of their idolatry and to be confident in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're not doing it. You're going out there and paying other people off to break treaties because you're afraid that you can't protect yourself. You're not supposed to be protecting yourself. God is. And his reaction was not so great, etc., etc. His punishment appears to be a sickness that killed him. And that's the pasuk, that's the verse that we're dealing with, that at the end of his life he gets this injury in his foot, which is symbolic, I think, and he dies seeking doctors, not seeking God. And what Asa's big mistake is, this king of the land of Yehuda, appears to be that he always thinks he can get it done. He has very proper intentions. He's always doing what's best for the Jewish people. He's doing what's best for himself and for the spirituality, etc., etc., but he goes and he gets it done on his own. And he never really knows when to quit and when to turn to God. And even, that's what it means, even when he was ill and he should have turned to God and he didn't, he went to the doctors. Meaning his last decision was his death, because he didn't know when to look up into heaven, which is very powerful. So Nachmanides is using that verse, and he's saying that it was the mistake was twofold. A, that he didn't turn to God, and B, that he went to the doctors. And Nachmanides' question is, what do you mean? The Torah tells us in source number 1 that going to the doctor is perfectly acceptable. So he says, not for that kind of person, not at that period in time. If this king was ill, he should have gone back to the very same prophet that came to him and told him he made the mistake. And he didn't. And that was wrong for him, because he should not have seen a doctor. He didn't need one. He needed spiritual guidance, not physical. That's Nachmanides' approach. But what about us?
What years were you talking about? A few hundred. A good few hundred.
From now?
No, when you talk about the story that you just said.
Meaning, we're talking a couple thousand.
Okay.
We're talking a couple thousand.
Okay.
Okay. So what about us? So the Ramban continues, second paragraph. This was their intention, the rabbis, when they stated a doctor is given permission to heal. Now listen how closely he reads that text. They did not say a sick person can seek healing. Rather, since the person is sick and chooses to involve himself with medicine, and he is not part of Adat Hashem who chose life, meaning those generations which had that spiritual level, the doctor should not refuse to treat him for fear he may die because he's an expert, and not because God is the only healer, because it was already the custom. Meaning, the Torah, according to Nachmanides, does not say, if you're sick, go to the doctor. The Torah says, if you are a physician, and someone does not have that faith to turn to God because of the situation that he lives in, that's not the way people behave. He doesn't have the confidence to say, God will take care of this. And he knocks on your door, and he said, I heard you have a remedy for X, Y, and Z. So then, the doctor shouldn't turn him away. That's all the Torah was telling us. Therefore, the men who were fighting, who hit each other with the stone, the one who hit must pay because the Torah doesn't support its rulings on miracles. The one who is responsible for the damages caused in the fight doesn't have the right to say, God will take care of it. That's a ridiculous excuse. If the person was holding in that kind of level, if he had that access to prophecy, which existed in previous generations, so sure, he has the right to say, I don't need a doctor. But you as the damager, you as the aggressor, don't have the right not to pay. However, with the will of God, the way of man is not to be involved with medicine. In the yeshiva, what we would say is that medicine, according to the Ramban, is a b'diavad. It means it's a last resort. This is not something that we're proud of. This is not something that we embrace 100%. The opposite is true. Philosophically, it's very challenging. If God is the one who imposes the illness, God is the one who should take it away. Those are not the times that we live in. We can't really figure out why it happened because we don't have access to prophecy, which is something that was part of our history and isn't in the present. So practically, that's not a solution. Therefore, we fit into the category of people which the Torah describes in our parsha.
So really what we're saying is if you have a headache, don't take an aspirin.
I think the Maharal quotes, I think I saw it in the Maharal quotes a Gemara that says, Chash begrono yasok b'Torah. If a person feels something in his throat, he should go back to the Beit Midrash and learn more. Now, you have to figure out, how do you make that equation? I have no idea. That illness of the head is related to mitzvos and illness in the throat is related to Torah, or whatever it would be. It's obviously not that simple. It's probably case by case. That requires a prophet. That's not something we're capable of doing. I mean, people do nowadays go to see a Rabbi or something like that and they get some kind of solution. I got to ask the Rabbi where he figures that stuff out from. I have no idea. And it never hurts, under certain situations. It never hurts to commit to being a better person. We believe in that. We believe that mitzvos have tremendous power. But I don't see mitzvos as an antidote, even if it's a good idea. Sure, a person's in the hospital and they have a life-threatening illness. They should pray, and they should give charity. The Gemara says in Brachos that giving charity is a cure, is helpful for illness. That's what we do. So you can give charity in the hopes that God will heal a certain person, but it's not guaranteed. So you got to do your part. But was that always the case? Is that ideal? The Ramban doesn't think so. Now, put these two opinions together, and let's assume for a minute that we were all extremely, extremely religious people. Put number 3 and number 4 together. You have an internal disease, and it is the eve of Yom Kippur, and you're in the hospital, and the doctor hands you a thing full of pills, a cup full of pills for the next 24 hours. He says, take these with a glass of water every 6 hours for the next 2 days. Do you keep the fast, or do you take the pills? Question number 2. The doctor says, not on the fast day. Take the following pills, which are laced with pig fat, or gelatin, or whatever it is, to help the pills get swallowed. These are the only pills, there's no other solution. Take them or your illness will get worse. And you say, I don't want to. I'm not willing to break my fast on Yom Kippur. It's Yom Kippur. I'll take the risk. What happens next? Your wife calls the rabbi and tell my husband to take the pills, right? So do you take the pills or do you not take the pills? Thoughts?
You take the pills.
Take the pills. What about our issue? You're not going to take the number 3, number 4 approach. So first of all, we shouldn't be dealing with internal things because clearly we do. And we don't have the right to assume there were people on that kind of level.
But hang on a second. It says here that we just read a doctor is given permission to heal.
Right, but does that mean that that's the ideal situation? It's Yom Kippur. Maybe today you should have faith.
Severely sick. We're assuming severely sick.
Yeah, let's assume. Yeah, we're not talking about headaches.
Right.
Well, it depends on how much trust you place in the doctor. Also.
Right. How much place? Right.
Trust, where are you placing your trust?
Right.
The doctor or?
So this question came to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is the former chief Sephardic rabbi of the state of Israel. He's still alive and well and doing a lot of halachic decision making from his home now. But one of the most tremendous minds of our generation, and he's also someone who, in a lot of ways, has changed the Sephardic culture from being primarily focused, this may not be so PC, but primarily focused on tradition and spirituality to having a much more solid foundation in Jewish law. Rav Ovadia is one of those tremendous minds. And you see that, anyone can see that by reading through his responsa, the questions that he gets, and the pages and pages and pages of sources that he gives for answers. I heard a story, I don't know if it's true, that he has a photographic memory, and he has a library in his house where he knows exactly where every book on the shelves is. And apparently they have services in his house or something, and somebody during davening pulled out a book to read it and put it back in the wrong place, and he was looking all over for it and he couldn't find it because it was out of place, thousands of books. I don't know if it's a true story, but he's really a very, very special person. He's very outspoken also, gets himself into some trouble. If you're familiar, you can find those videos on YouTube. Very interesting statements about everything from women not supposed to be wearing wigs, they should only be covering their hair completely with hats or things like that, because wigs are a terrible thing, which is right, shaitels, yeah, shaitels he thinks are terrible, and people that encourage their children to wear them is terrible, and rabbis that say it's okay are terrible, and he's very intense. That's also the culture in his community. He's very specific. Right now he's involved in the controversy over conversion with the Israeli soldiers, if you're following that in the news. He is in support of the conversion, to validate the conversion, and he's getting a lot of heat from the more right-wing communities in the Haredi communities. I'm not so sure on the details. What I read on that, this is again a tangent, but what I read from the current chief rabbi, which is supported by Rav Ovadia Yosef, is so black on white clear that the only thing that could be wrong about it is that the way it's being played out in the Israeli court system is not so fair. It could be that you have people that are... It's a longer discussion. We can do conversion at a different time, but if you're following the letter of the law and you convert people, there's really nothing anyone else can do about it. They're Jewish and their Judaism is as legitimate as yours and mine. There's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter if they're keeping Shabbos anymore. It doesn't matter if they keep kosher anymore. Once they convert, they're like born Jewish. There's nothing you can do. And what a lot of people are attempting to do is nullify existing conversions, that these people only came because the countries they were living in were under worse circumstances, or et cetera, and they joined the army. Now the army is feeling pressure to convert them, because they want them to be Jewish, et cetera, and the army is doing it with the most sincere intentions, and they're not demanding that these people make a true commitment to Torah from the start, which is binding and necessary. And if a person is not sincere and they were joking and they never intended to keep mitzvot, their conversion is a zero. Absolute zero, no matter what. So there are extremes here. But assuming that everything's being followed to the letter of the law, there's no reason why the conversions are invalid. So there must be something going on that they're debating that I don't know about. But Rav Ovadia is in support of the government's, the religious sectors in the court system that are supporting this conversion, and he's the big name on the sheet. He's at the top of the list.
And how do you feel about it?
Like I said, it's dependent on facts that are going on in the courts there that I just don't know. Who these soldiers are, what the expectations of their conversion is, I don't know.
Conversion. How do you feel about the conversion?
What do you mean?
People who convert.
There's nothing to feel about it. It's black on white in the Torah. Conversion is 100% acceptable. We don't proselytize. We don't go out and encourage people to convert. But if someone steps forward and they're interested in converting to Judaism, in fact, another famous Tosfos in a different place, Tosfos talks about there's a certain woman that appears in the Midrashim as attempting to convert by Abraham, who turns her down, by Isaac, who turns her down, by Jacob, who turns her down, and she's so interested in getting into this family that she marries Esav. She marries Yaakov's brother. And who is her great-great-grandchild? Trivia? Amalek. And Tosfos says Amalek is the enemy of the Jewish people in the desert, the only nation that we are commanded to wipe out off the face of the earth.
What was she doing wrong that they wouldn't accept her conversion?
I have no idea why they didn't. And some of the commentaries on the discussions on conversion say the point of this story is not just to say, man, that's ironic. The point of the story is to show you that we believe in conversion 100%. We don't go out and look for it. We don't invite people in because the consequences of someone joining the religion who's going to drag other people down, that's a different discussion. But if someone comes and they're sincere, we don't have the right to turn them away. If you do an honest search into what their motivations are and they're pure, conversion's conversion. And you can't just turn them away and say it's not worth the risk. It is worth the risk because they're sincere about joining our religion. It's not closed door. There were periods in Jewish history when they did close the door on conversion. During the time of King Solomon, the tradition was that the state of Israel, the land of the Jewish people, was so wealthy that it was really appealing to live there. And people were coming from left and right to immigrate, to move into the country, and they were seeking conversion so that they would be considered equal. And that draws into the question of what their motivations were. And then they said that it was too difficult to ascertain what people's motivations really were, so they closed the doors. But no one's closed the doors nowadays. So conversion's open. It's just a question of how sincere the people are and how trustworthy the people that are doing the conversions are. It has to be in front of a legitimate court. 3 rabbis have to know what they're talking about, have to expect the person to commit to Torah mitzvahs. But it's the real business. That's Rav Ovadia Yosef. So Rav Ovadia gets the question in source 5 on the top of the back side of the page. The question is, a sick person who the expert doctors say that he will fast on Yom Kippur, his sickness may progress and lead to danger. So the doctors say if he fasts, he's in trouble. And the person wants to be strict upon himself to fast and says he has the faith in that God will keep him from danger. Is it permissible to permit him to fast or not? The rabbi called Rav Ovadia and said, what do I tell my congregant? He doesn't want to take the pills. He doesn't want to drink. It's a very, very long response, but reacting to source 3 and 4, mainly to source 3, and those who have supported the Ibn Ezra, listen to Rav Ovadia. However, with forgiveness of their honor, their words are trouble. It's explicit in the words of the Rishonim, meaning the other commentaries on the Talmud and on the Chumash, that when there is a risk, it's forbidden for a sick person to be strict with himself and fast on Yom Kippur. It's clear in the Radbaz, that's one of the commentaries that he quotes, that God forbid he should not be strict and fast. If the doctors suspect it will lead to illness as a result. If one is strict upon himself, behold, he is obligated with his life. As it states, but your blood for your soul I will demand. In other words, he's killing himself. And that's not acceptable.
So you must take the medicine?
Absolutely. Hands down. Rav Ovadia says there's no question about it.
So it's back to life.
So back to life.
Life over death.
Life over death, exactly. What about source 5? What about source 3? That it's internal diseases we're not really supposed to interfere with. Rav Ovadia himself said, I don't really get what they're talking about. You know, it takes someone like that to... You're talking about a person who says, listen, most opinions in rabbinic literature say I should take the pills, but I feel guilty, and it's Yom Kippur, and there are opinions to back me up. So what do I say, personally? It's hard to negate the Ibn Ezra who came before us. I don't have the power to do that. It's hard for me to say, well, you're right about the Ramban that ideally we shouldn't be involved in medicine to begin with, but I think you should take it anyway. Make your wife happy, or whatever the case might be. But Rabbi Vadia does that. And he says this is crazy. You got to look at the majority opinion. And the majority opinion throughout the rabbinic literature is to support saving your own life. And that's what he told them that they should do. So I think that's an interesting
And the same
idea.
answer with regard to the gelatin, right?
Absolutely. One question we call a lumdus question, a theoretical legal question in this discussion, is when, with Yom Kippur and non-kosher food and things like that, the Torah says don't eat non-kosher food. The Torah says don't eat on Yom Kippur. So now you need to eat on Yom Kippur. So how do we view that eating? Do we consider that as
Eating
you...
or taking medicines, right?
Either one. How do we perceive that action? Is that considered you disobeyed the order of God and you ate on Yom Kippur, however God understands, considering the circumstances? Or for you there was no command to fast on Yom Kippur at all?
The former.
So that's up for debate. Where that usually comes up is, that's a famous question about Shabbos. You have to drive to the hospital on Shabbos. The Torah says you can't drive to the hospital on Shabbos. So, well, I'm ill, so the Torah isn't talking to me? Or the Torah says not to drive, but I have no choice. And the way that you react to that question is really how you approach these transgressions that are appropriate. You know, how generous are we with driving to the hospital and then driving back because I had to go? Or things like that. It's a more difficult question.
You can't drive back.
Rav Moshe Feinstein said you could. Because if people can't drive back, then they're not going to go. It's too hard. Whatever. So it's all part of the healing process. So he allowed it.
So
I assume it's not walkable and things like that.
So what about Hatzalah? When they go on Shabbos to save somebody and they drive back?
So here's a good question. Hatzalah is tricky. I think Hatzalah does not drive back. I'm not sure. Hatzalah does not drive back. Good. So right. So obviously, if you can avoid it, better. In Baltimore, they have a system for the. I know where I grew up that the doctors who have shifts that go through Friday night, they have paid people in advance who will drive them home. They have a system worked out because there are a lot of Jewish doctors there. One question that Rav Moshe also deals with in our discussion is what happens if a person wants to study medicine? Let's say he's a Kohen. Kohen can't come in contact with a dead body, can't be under the same roof as a dead body. So the Kohen says to the rabbi, I want to go to medical school. And what does the rabbi say? Well, you can't go in because there are cadavers. So in the 20th century, rabbis were answering that question and saying it's okay to go because you're saving lives. Saving lives is a mitzvah. We have to have doctors. And Moshe Feinstein opposed that view. And he said, yeah, you're saving lives when you perform surgery. So you can perform surgeries on Shabbos. You can take medicines that aren't kosher on Yom Kippur because you need to save your life. But taking exams on a Saturday in medical school is not saving anyone's life. Walking into a hospital to do experiments on cadavers is not saving anyone's life. And you can't ignore that because eventually down the line you're going to be saving lives. That was Rav Moshe's approach. I don't know if I don't think that everyone agrees to that, but that was Rav Moshe's famous opinion.
Okay. What about the diabetic? I mean, you talked about fast, right? The diabetic, if he fasts, okay, it drives blood sugar nuts.
Right. So one of the questions, it's going to be a gray area that I'm not capable of answering that question, but let's say, you were talking about specifically serious illnesses. What happens if you have something that's minor? Meaning you have something that if the person fasts all day on Yom Kippur, he's going to be in bed for a week after, but the doctor says he's not going to die. It's going to drive his blood sugar nuts, but in a couple of days he'll recover. Give him some insulin, do what you got to do, and give him a couple of days off of work, and by Wednesday he'll be all right. So under those circumstances, it's a little bit more tricky. You know, how much are we willing to sacrifice? How much risk are you willing to put a pregnant woman under to fast, especially when it comes to Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, when it's really hard to get at? Other fast days, not such a big deal. But for the big two, it's not so easy to get around. Depends who your rabbi is and what their approach is, and taking small amounts of water so it's not considered like you're actually drinking, a shot glass every 12 minutes, something like that. There are different approaches to how to deal with it, but it depends on the consequences. If you look in source 6, that's a quote from the Shulchan Aruch, who at the bottom line, the law on this issue, Nitna Torah Rishus L'Rofi L'Rapos, the Torah gives permission to doctors to heal, mitzvah. and it's a mitzvah to do it. Ubechlal pikuach nefesh, healing people is part of saving lives. And a person, monea atzmo, if a person says, I don't want to be involved in this, it's not a spiritual thing to be doing, he turns down patients that he's capable of healing, harezeh shofech damim, that is the equivalent of murder. Which I think is a very powerful statement. The equivalent of murder. I mean, you have the ability to save someone's life and you don't? Unacceptable. Skipping to source 7, because we're basically out of time, but in source 7, the Gemara in Brachot talks about different blessings that people make under certain circumstances. And this one is a person who goes to have bloodlet. It basically means anyone who goes for a medical procedure. So Rav Acha's suggestion was, he says, one who enters to have bloodlet should say, may it be your will, God, that this should be for healing, and heal me, because you are the trusted healer, and your healing is true, because it is not the way of people to heal, just that they have become accustomed. Which was kind of what Nachmanides was driving at. And this might be a source for it in the Talmud. He says, God, I need you to heal me, because we know that healing people isn't the way we're supposed to live, and I'm only going because everyone else goes. I'm only going because that's normal, but I know I need to count on you. Look at the response of Abaye in the bold. Abaye said, you shouldn't say this, because Rabbi Shmuel taught us, V'rapo yirapeh, the doctors have permission to heal, which is a very important mentality to walk out of the shir with. That we're not saying, this opinion really goes against Nachmanides. We're not saying that you should go into the doctor with your head down, take off your yarmulke on the way into the hospital. That's not the approach that Abaye wants us to take. Rabbi Shmuel's rule from our source in our parsha is that not only do we have the right to be healed, but we have the responsibility to protect our bodies. One last comment. Source number 9, we talk about God as being a rofei chinam, as one who heals for free. That expression appears in different sources throughout the literature, and the question is, what exactly does that mean, that God heals for free? Does it mean He doesn't charge? So it's an interesting thing to know, the gematria, the numerical value of Shechina, which is the Hebrew word for the divine spirit of God. The numerical value of Shechina is identical to Rofei Chinam, that God equals that free healer, which is an interesting gematria. But I saw in the Nishmas Avram, where, to give credit where credit is due, almost all of this year came from this encyclopedia of Jewish medical ethics. And he says, what does it mean that God is a divine spirit, is a free healer? God doesn't charge, but doctors do charge. He says what it means is that when we're healed by human beings, there are consequences. You have something that's spreading from your leg to the rest of your body and they amputate. Sure, you're better, but you lost in the process. The pills that you take don't taste good. The medicine is not so comfortable. It has side effects. There's always consequences because this is human intervention to God's higher plan. But when God heals, it's free of consequences, and that's what it means. And it's a very important thing to keep in mind in terms of the issue of dealing with this philosophically, that even when we seek medical treatment, healing that we're supposed to seek, that it's a mitzvah to seek, it's a mitzvah to practice, at the same time we have to make sure when we're heading into the doctor's office and when we're better on the way out that we keep God in mind and we recognize that He's still involved even when we go and we seek the doctors.
So Rofei Chinam and Shechina are the same.
Apparently, we have to do the math, but yeah, it's going to take a couple seconds. So, but I'm pretty sure that is, which is an interesting idea. If you don't mind, for 2 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we say, and this is a good, I only saw this week for the first time, and I think it's a really interesting thing for davening. When we talk about healing and davening, what do we say? Rifa'inu Hashem b'nei rafeh. Rifa'inu, God should heal us, b'nei rafeh, and we will be healed. The pei has no dot, which is what the Ibn Ezra was driving at, and that speaks to the exact same point as Rofei Chinam. God is the Rifa'inu Hashem, it is Kal. What does it mean that the conjugation of the Resh Pei Aleph is light, it's lacking the dot when God does it, and it's heavy, it has a Pei when it's done by man, that it's V'rapo Yirapeh versus Rifa'inu Hashem. So maybe it's the exact same point, that when man is intervening in terms of treating people, so there are consequences, it's a difficult process. But when we daven to God that He should heal us, we're not asking for the same quality treatment. We're asking for a lot better. Rifa'inu Hashem v'nei rafei, that it shouldn't just be successful, but that it should be free of all the suffering that comes along, which is unfortunately the reality with a lot of the treatment. It's great that we have things like chemotherapy for leukemia, but I mean the consequences are terrible. And it's a very painful process. And something to keep in mind when we daven for Rifa'inu, that even if the doctors are going to get it done with God's help, that we want it to be as painless as possible. It's more of a grammar lesson, but an important lesson at the same time. So.